Welcome to the Discernment Drop.
Hello.
And what we do here is we take some really powerful, sometimes highly charged source material.
Really charged.
And we just, we filter it. We try to understand the logic, the architecture behind the argument. We're not here to debate the conclusions.
No, not at all. We are here to dissect and really understand how the argument is built. And today, we've got a phenomenal submission from a listener.
We do?
They were looking for something that was, an intellectual and theological challenge, a script that just refuses to compromise on its definitions.
Yeah, and that requires a very specific kind of engagement from us, right? We have to move past all the emotional noise and just focus on the clinical terminology the author is insisting on.
Absolutely.
So the material we're jumping into today comes from Pastor John L. Widdifield. Specifically, we've got excerpts from his writings. One is called Non-Complementary Design and a Dictionary Hostage Crisis.
What a title.
And the other is Non-Complementary, the biology that refuses to lie. Now, if you're not familiar with Pastor John, his style is, well, it's unmistakable. It's this blend of really robust theology, but it's delivered with this intense high-octane energy.
Right. He calls it Louisiana hot sauce.
Exactly. And his stated goal is to enlighten, inspire, and convict.
So our mission in this discernment drop, it's to analyze the single core of Pastor John's argument, which is this strategic need for one single clinically objective word. A word he claims is bulletproof for discussing the mechanics of sexual union.
And that word is non-complementary.
Non-complementary. We've got to unpack all the theological, the anatomical, even the prophetic claims that he builds around this word. We have to capture the logic, even when it's, delivered with a laugh.
Right. And you, the listener, you really need to grasp the strategy here. This isn't just him picking a word he likes.
Yeah.
It's the development of a kind of theological infrastructure, something that's intended to withstand all this cultural pressure. So we're going to start right at the beginning with what Pastor John says is the foundational problem.
Which isn't what you think it is.
But not at all. It's a crisis of language that he says comes before and is much bigger than what most people are calling the culture war. Okay, so let's unpack this central diagnosis. Pastor John opens by just immediately dismissing the idea that we are primarily in a culture war.
Yeah, he just tosses it aside.
He insists that framing is way too narrow. It's too focused on, little skirmishes here and there. He argues that fundamentally we are actually living in a dictionary hostage crisis.
It's a brilliant rhetorical framing. I mean, think about it. It immediately reassigns the battlefield.
How so?
Well, a culture war that implies a battle over actions and beliefs, right? But a dictionary hostage crisis that implies the battle is over the fundamental tools you need to even define reality. He's arguing that if the opposition captures and redefines your language, well, they don't need to win the debate on morality anymore.
They've already won the argument over what a human being even is.
Exactly. They've won the argument over anthropology.
And he paints this really chilling picture of the kidnappers, the forces driving this cultural redefinition. He says they have explicit, non-negotiable demands.
And it's not just asking for tolerance or acceptance.
Not at all. According to Pastor John, they are after your words, your definitions, and this is the critical part. He says they are targeting your brainstem.
Your brainstem. I mean, by that, he's referring to the most foundational, unthinking, objective knowledge.
Like 2 + 2 = 4.
Exactly. The core truths that come before conscious thought. A square has 4 sides. When language gets redefined, your ability to hold on to those objective truths, especially about biology, about complementarity, it gets compromised at the deepest possible level.
So you lose the ability to even articulate reality.
Because your basic vocabulary has been corrupted.
And the consequence for not complying with these demands, he says with this sort of dark humor, is immediate social and professional exile. But it's packaged as, mandatory ideological conformity. Yeah. He describes the consequence like this. You get sent to a 6-week re-education spa called Learning to Pretend.
Learning to pretend. That phrase just captures the central accusation of the whole source material. The idea that our cultural consensus now demands active, conscious delusion. You're forced to pretend that incompatible structures are complementary, or that, subjective feeling overrides objective design. This refusal to adhere to reality. That, in his view, is the crisis.
And he's really emphatic about the speed of this crisis, especially how it targets the young.
Yeah.
Pastor John observes that the cultural goal is to make sure that children are taught to question foundational concepts, pronouns, biological identity, before they even master long division.
So it's not just about changing definitions.
No. It's about embedding ideological conditioning so early that basic math and foundational reality just become secondary concerns.
And this, according to the source, this is why our current vocabulary just fails. Words we've always used. Sex, marriage, gender. They've been so corrupted, so bent, so weaponized that just using them immediately puts you on the defensive.
Right. You're immediately labeled as hateful or phobic. And he argues that this immediate moral condemnation is exactly what the kidnappers want. It's designed to just shut down objective discussion.
So the existing language is like a linguistic trap. If the world is screaming identity, and the church is screaming morality, and everyone is throwing around science terms like chromosomes.
Like they just graduated from TikTok University, as he puts it.
Right. All you have is just rhetorical noise. It's not clear, objective communication. And Pastor John says that this noise, this desperate context, is what necessitates a new clinical word, a precise linguistic instrument.
And this is the strategic point of intervention for him. He introduces the rescue word, the term he's designed to be immune to this whole dictionary hostage crisis because it has no prior cultural baggage.
And that word is non-complementary.
What's fascinating here, and I think this is where the source's strategic genius lies, is the calculated neutrality of the term. We have to spend some time analyzing why he thinks this word is bulletproof.
Well, it works, according to Pastor John, because it deliberately avoids the moral and emotional arguments, at least at first.
It's structurally immune.
It is, because it describes structure, not souls. It's a term of engineering, not emotion.
Right. If you say an act is sinful, the listener immediately puts up a moral barrier based on their own identity or belief.
But if you say an act is non-complementary, you force the listener to deal with the objective, observable mechanics of the situation first. It changes the entire conversation.
So the term functions like a sterile scalpel.
That's a great way to put it.
It strips away all the slurs, the venom, the emotional reactivity that have contaminated all the traditional terms. The goal is to provide a term that's clear, true, beautiful, and clinical. It just reports on the physical reality.
And he argues that when you use this term, you're externalizing the testimony. You are letting, and this is a quote, biology stand there like, I didn't sign up for this nonsense.
So you're shifting the argument from I, the pastor or the believer, judge your morality to?
The observed structural reality judges the activity. It reframes the whole discussion from personal condemnation to an objective, observable, physical fact.
And this strategic linguistic maneuver is absolutely key to understanding this entire source.
It is.
If non-complementary works the way he says it does, it forces the conversation back to engineering specifications, to anatomical design, to an objective blueprint. And in doing so, it bypasses all the emotional pitfalls of identity politics and traditional moral accusations.
It becomes the ultimate rhetorical defense against being labeled hateful.
Because you're just describing mechanics. You're not passing judgment on a person.
And this isn't just theoretical for him. Pastor John stresses that the beauty of the term is in its truthfulness. It refuses to bend to ideology. If a physical design is clearly intended for one function through a complementary alignment, then any activity that violates that alignment is, by definition, structurally compromised. That's the objective reality the word is meant to convey.
We have to emphasize that point before we move on. The neutrality is the weapon. By moving the conversation to physics and engineering, he eliminates the ability of the opposition to immediately start shouting about phobia or bigotry.
Because the claim is reduced to a statement about interlocking parts.
All right, so now that Pastor John has given us the clinical term, he moves into what he calls his humor section.
And this section is designed not just for, a bit of levity.
No.
It's designed to create this inescapable logical separation between two concepts that our culture is just intentionally blending together.
Affection and companionship on one side.
Versus sexual union on the other.
And this separation is absolutely crucial to his entire argument.
Yeah.
He starts by giving full permission for affection and companionship.
Oh, yeah, he's all for it. If you want intimacy, his advice is lighthearted, it's practical. He says, adopt a cat, start a garden.
Or my favorite, form a two-person book club dedicated entirely to analyzing the moral and structural themes in Hallmark movies.
All of this, he says, is beautiful, it's permissible, it's structurally sound for a relationship and community.
But he warns, the moment you start talking about sexual union, the entire context shifts.
Immediately.
It instantly stops being about feelings or identity or emotional fulfillment, and it becomes strictly about mechanics.
And you have to hold that distinction tight, because he says the confusion right there is what allows the dictionary hostage crisis to thrive in the first place.
So to illustrate this mandatory separation, the source material introduces several comedic analogies, but they're structurally rigorous. They're designed to show mechanical incompatibility.
And they're not just jokes. These are illustrations of linguistic and conceptual absurdity.
Let's start with the pop-tart lie. I think this is a fantastic example of describing a false claim to achievement based on not following the required process.
Okay, so the analogy works like this. Imagine you proclaim, I baked a croissant.
With all the pride of a French pastry chef.
Exactly. But in reality, all you did was microwave a Pop-Tart. Now, the result is a warm, edible, maybe even somewhat satisfying product.
Right.
But the process required to achieve a true croissant, the labor, the layers of butter, the specific ingredients, the structural engineering of the dough, the time it takes, all of that is entirely absent.
So claiming you baked a croissant is a lie.
It's a lie about the nature of the action you performed, regardless of the warm, edible outcome.
And the parallel is clear. Calling a non-complementary act sex is like calling microwaving a Pop-Tart baking a croissant.
It's a linguistic fraud. It's confusing an activity with the specific structural process required for the definition to be true.
He has another one too, the athletic claim.
Oh yeah, the I ran a marathon line, where, the activity involved running, the participant felt exerted, maybe they even saw God on the way to the mailbox once.
Yeah, right.
But the action fundamentally does not meet the standard. It doesn't meet the structural requirement of a 26.2-mile marathon. The intensity of your feeling doesn't validate the definition.
My favorite for illustrating design failure is the plumbing analogy. This one gets right to the heart of structural necessity.
Okay, so imagine you claim a custom-built house has full plumbing. You've got sinks, toilets, showers, and they're all functioning perfectly.
Sounds good so far.
But then the building inspector shows up and finds there's no place to hook up the washing machine. That specific functional requirement, the heavy-duty drainage, the specialized piping, the hot and cold hookups you need for laundry, it's absent from the design. You can have 90% functioning plumbing, but if that foundational design element is missing.
The claim of full plumbing is demonstrably false.
And the source argues that same-sex activity is like that missing washing machine hookup. The parts are there, and they can be used for pleasure, but the specific foundational design required for the covenantal function is inherently absent. The non-complementarity voids the descriptive claim of full union.
And for the modern audience, I mean, the USB-C analogy is just inescapable.
Right, USB-C into USB-C. It's physically possible, maybe even a little amusing to try.
But it is not data transfer.
No, he calls it non-complementary activity, or two plugs, no outlet. The design is perfect for plugging into an outlet, but when you plug it into its structural twin, the intended complementary function fails.
Because the required reciprocal design is missing.
The common thread in all these examples is that the absurdity is meant to expose the core logical error.
Which is?
The act is not condemned because it feels bad. It's classified as non-complementary because it fails to meet the structural specifications of the blueprint.
Which is why Pastor John then moves on to this highly humorous but also highly illustrative personification of biological parts filing grievances.
He describes the anatomy itself as actively revolting against its misuse. So the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, is apparently requesting a new functional assignment because it's confused by its deployment.
And the prostate, an organ intrinsically linked to male reproductive function, is asking for pastoral counseling.
Because it's so confused by its role in a non-complementary activity.
And the colon.
The colon, he claims, has written a resignation letter.
It's his hyperbolic way of saying that the anatomy literally filed for divorce.
It's a powerful rhetorical device because it completely externalizes the judgment.
Yeah, that's the genius of the framing, right?
It is.
Yeah.
This isn't hatred or judgment coming from the preacher.
No.
It's biology malpractice. Or, as he says, pure anatomy trying to file a restraining order. By making the body the objective arbiter, he converts a subjective moral argument into an objective engineering critique.
The body itself is testifying against the activity.
Asserting that it was designed for complementarity and therefore rejects non-complementary usage.
Which leads us perfectly into the next segment, because if the analogies show us the structural failure, we need to understand the theological and academic underpinnings that he claims make this whole structural argument airtight. So we're now moving from the clinical observation and the humor to the intellectual infrastructure.
Right. Pastor John knows that just resting on analogies isn't enough. He wants to make the internal logic of the traditional Christian view so robust that it eliminates, in his words, every logical vulnerability.
And this is where we need to slow down a little bit, because this segment is really the linchpin of the whole thing.
It really is. He has to successfully address the main philosophical critique that gets leveled against the traditional design argument.
Which he correctly identifies as the Notebook LM critique.
Yeah, basically the question of infertile or elderly couples.
Right. If your argument is all about biological potential, then infertile couples must also be non-complementary by that logic.
Exactly. And Pastor John uses his 3 pillars to just destroy that critique by proving the standard is design and covenant, not function.
Okay, let's start with Pillar 1, the covenantal structure. How does he define this, and why does it have to come first?
Pillar 1 dictates that marriage is fundamentally and primarily a covenant.
An agreement.
An agreement before God and man, ratified by lifelong vows, and it is emphatically not a reproductive factory. This ordering is absolutely essential.
Why?
Because if reproduction were the primary identity of a marriage, then, as he notes, any couple unable to conceive due to age, sickness, or infertility would have a functionally invalid, or at least a lesser marriage.
So the commitment and the vows are the foundational standard, not the reproductive outcome. The inability to reproduce is secondary to the covenant that's already been established.
Precisely. Reproduction is identified as a potential fruit of the covenant, a blessing, but it is not the covenant itself. Because the covenant comes before the reproductive ability, the union remains fully valid in God's sight, regardless of fertility status.
So that immediately validates the marriages of all couples where conception is impossible, but the structural promise remains. Okay, that sets the foundation. Now, Pillar 2 brings us back to the structural argument, design complementarity. This is where we define the form that images the covenant.
So design complementarity is the core anthropological claim he's making. It asserts that the specific pairing of male plus female constitutes the structural form, the physical blueprint that Scripture blesses. The male form and the female form are structurally complementary, meaning they're designed to fit together for a specific, comprehensive function.
And this is the critical distinction that he says eliminates that logical vulnerability around infertility.
It is.
Pastor John asserts this is not about the ability to reproduce. It is about the design form required for the covenantal image.
And he argues that an infertile couple is not non-complementary. And why? Because their physical design form is still aligned. They still possess the requisite anatomical components that fit together according to the original blueprint.
So their bodies might be, as he says, under the curse, broken or aged.
Right, meaning their function is wounded, but the form is intact. The components exist in the proper configuration, they're just currently non-functional in one specific area.
So the form is the standard. If a married woman has had a hysterectomy, her function is broken or limited, but her form is still female. It's structurally aligned with the male form, so the complementary design is preserved.
The wound is functional, not structural. This distinction is crucial. When he talks about same-sex couples, Pastor John argues the non-complementarity is structural. The necessary anatomical component for that reciprocal fit, the outlet to the plug, is absent by design.
Okay.
But when he's discussing an infertile couple, the issue is only functional. The components are there, but the potential output is limited by providence or physical damage. It's the difference between a design error and a functional breakdown of an otherwise correct design.
Which finally brings us to Pillar 3, the teleological orientation. We need to define this clearly. It's a high-level philosophical term.
Teleology refers to the purpose or the ultimate goal of an object or a system. So in this context, it's asking, what direction is the union inherently pointed toward?
Okay.
And teleological orientation states that marriage, by its very nature and its structural design, points toward fruitfulness, even when that fruitfulness isn't achieved.
The design itself.
The design itself, male and female, is built with the inherent potential for new life. It carries the telos, the purpose of creation, of proliferation, of imaging the covenant.
So even two elderly believers who know they can't conceive are still operating within God's design.
Because their union is structurally shaped toward that original blueprint, which included the goal of fruitfulness. Their activities, even if they're physically barren, are still aligned with the intentional structure of creation.
Right.
They're following the map, even if the road is currently blocked by age or circumstance.
So the underlying structure of their union is still teleologically oriented toward the possibility of fruitfulness.
Even if providence or biological age has closed that door, this is the difference. The design aims at fruitfulness.
This synthesis is where Pastor John argues he's made the logical foundation impenetrable. He's eliminated all the ambiguity that the infertile couple critique might try to introduce. So let's clearly summarize the logical conclusion of these three pillars based on his framework.
Okay. For infertile couples, they have a complementary design, they uphold the covenant, and they retain the teleological orientation. It's still aimed at fruitfulness. They're just suffering from a wounded function.
For elderly couples, they also have a complementary design. They uphold the covenant. They retain the teleological orientation. They're just limited by providential limits like age or circumstance, but the structure is still valid.
But for same-sex couples, they possess a non-complementary design, meaning the structural form is not aligned with the blueprint.
And as a consequence,
they possess no teleological orientation toward the fruitfulness that's inherent in that design form. Therefore, the activity is structurally incapable of enacting the covenantal image.
So the ultimate standard, Pastor John insists, is not the ability to reproduce. It is the design aiming at fruitfulness. And if the design itself contradicts the blueprint, if you have two plugs with no outlet, it cannot be deemed the holy union of complementarity, regardless of the love or affection that might be present.
And this is why that clinical word, non-complementary, is so vital to his whole argument. It describes this structural misalignment before any moral judgment is ever passed.
So having established that really rigorous academic foundation, Pastor John shifts the tone again.
The humor kind of subsides, and he takes up what he calls the prophetic hammer.
This is the moment where that intellectual structure gets converted into practical, truth-telling application.
And the core truth bomb, which is delivered with maximum intensity, is this quote from the source. The Bible doesn't call same-sex sexual activity love, identity, or destiny. It calls it non-complementary.
A union that cannot enact the covenantal design.
And he argues that this statement is deliberately stripped of any political or emotional charge. It's not hateful, it's not political, and it is certainly not phobic. It's just reality with subtitles.
That's a great phrase. The term non-complementary is the necessary subtitle that you add to the action itself.
And by calling it a mechanical description, he reinforces this idea that it's classification, not condemnation.
It's a diagnosis.
It's an accurate diagnosis of the structural reality. And he brings back another analogy to clarify this separation between a structural limitation and a moral insult.
The bicycle plane analogy.
Right. You wouldn't call a bicycle broken because it doesn't fly. A bicycle is perfectly fine as a bicycle. It achieves its design telos, its purpose of ground transportation.
But, and here's the crucial step, you also wouldn't call that bicycle a plane.
Exactly. The bicycle's inability to fly is a structural limitation, not a failure within its own definition. But redefining it as a plane when it lacks wings, engines, and the inherent design for vertical movement, that is a lie about its nature and function.
And this is what Pastor John accuses the culture of doing, demanding that we rename the bicycle a plane, despite this structural reality.
Yeah. He attributes this confusion directly to ideological overreach, and he specifically calls out the Department of Education.
Yeah, he says they've been systematically redefining everything since 2010.
Which is a clear chronological marker, in his view, for when this dictionary hostage crisis really accelerated.
And the systemic redefinition is why he introduces what I think is the most powerful ethical argument in this whole segment.
The doctor analogy?
The doctor analogy. It's this comparison between theological diagnosis, which is truth-telling, and medical care, which is compassion. And he uses it to demonstrate that objectivity is the highest form of love.
Okay, so he asks you, the listener, to imagine a life or death medical scenario. You've had a massive injury, and your arm is hanging off your body just by a tendon.
You're in shock. You go to the doctor, and you're terrified.
In that moment of extreme vulnerability and denial, you certainly do not want the medical professional to engage in, therapeutic affirmation. You don't want the doctor to say, I respect your truth, and if your truth is that it's attached, who am I to judge your subjective reality?
No. What you demand, what you need, is objective truth, however painful it is.
You want the doctor to diagnose, to say, sir, the arm is lying to you. We need immediate, painful intervention to align your body with objective reality, or you will die.
And this is how he frames biblical anthropology and theological diagnosis.
The biblical truth regarding complementarity is the doctor. It is not hateful for the doctor to diagnose the truth of the design, to say this act is non-complementary.
In fact, he concludes, it is hateful to let someone die of denial.
And the implication there is pretty profound.
Yeah.
Allowing people to live in a state of delusion about objective anthropological reality just because the truth is difficult or politically unpopular is the ultimate lack of compassion.
So truth, delivered clinically through a term like non-complementary and without any malice, is framed as the highest form of care.
It provides the necessary diagnosis before any healing can even begin to occur.
By focusing on structural reality, he's trying to take the target off the person's identity and put it squarely on the activity's design failure.
So you can love the person completely, but still insist on the truthfulness of the diagnosis.
And so we have arrived at the ultimate consequence. This segment moves beyond, anatomical mechanics and dictionary definitions to the wider societal implications.
And Pastor John delivers this really stark prophetic warning. It's a three-step cascade about the danger of surrendering language. It's a slippery slope argument, but it's one that he builds rigorously on the logic of definitions that we've just explored.
And this warning is based on a concept of logical erosion, right?
Exactly. If the foundation, the language that defines reality, is surrendered, then the entire superstructure of society has to eventually collapse or be radically rebuilt.
Okay, so the first step is the fundamental one.
All right.
If you let culture rename behavior, you let culture redefine morality.
Let's elaborate on that a little. If society successfully mandates that a structurally incompatible activity, two plugs, no outlet, has to be linguistically labeled as sexual union, then the moral guardrails that were previously supplied by the requirement of complementarity are just dismantled. The definition of the act becomes purely subjective.
And if the definition is subjective, the morality has to follow. It moves from objective truth to just personal preference.
And once morality is successfully redefined, step two follows inevitably. If you let culture redefine morality, you let culture redesign humanity.
And this is the existential threat in the source material's view.
It is. Once the structural components of complementarity, male and female, are erased from the definition of a valid union, there's no logical stopping point for any other definition of humanity.
Why must a man be defined by his biological function? Why must a woman?
The objective definition of anthropos, of mankind, is undermined. If the design form is secondary to subjective feeling, then the traditional God-ordained family unit, the roles of men and women, the understanding of reproduction, it all becomes completely fluid.
So the entire foundation of anthropology is now based on subjective power dynamics instead of objective observable design.
That's the ultimate danger. Once you disregard the structural components, there's no inherent logic left to anchor human definition. Definitions just become negotiable based on who has the loudest voice or the prevailing political wind, rather than being rooted in the resilience of creation itself.
And that leads to step 3, which he delivers with what he calls the prophetic warning wearing a clown nose.
Right.
If you let culture redesign humanity, you wake up in a world where specific, shocking examples occur.
And these examples, while they're delivered with hyperbole, are intended to illustrate the logical endpoint of jettisoning the biological blueprint.
They're meant to shock you, the listener, into recognizing the extreme consequences of redefining the non-negotiable facts of creation.
He lists these absurd consequences of this ideological collapse. Things like men breastfeeding.
Because if female breasts can be redefined as just a food delivery system, why can't male bodies mimic that function?
Women having prostates, because if sex anatomy is irrelevant, then functional anatomy can just be arbitrarily assigned.
And, maybe most chillingly, the loss of basic human knowledge about creation itself.
Babies coming from Amazon Prime.
Babies coming from Amazon Prime, and the subsequent reality where nobody knows where babies come from, except Amazon.
And this is the source's way of saying that the cultural denial of complementarity leads to the eradication of the fundamental knowledge that life requires the male and female structure.
So he emphasizes that this redefinition is not compassion. It is pure societal capitulation to a cultural delusion. And refusing to lie about design is not about being political. It is about refusing to hand the steering wheel to Babylon.
So this fight, in his view, is not about judgment. It's about truthfulness. The fight for the word non-complementary is ultimately a fight for the definition of humanity itself.
If the dictionary is captured, the very foundation of moral, social, and anthropological reality collapses, leading to chaos and denial.
And that's the final critical insight from Pastor John. Truth is the first casualty of the dictionary hostage crisis. And the word non-complementary is his attempt to rescue a portion of objective reality from that crisis.
So we've completed our rigorous analysis of Pastor John L. Widdifield's argument for non-complementary design. We moved through his structural diagnosis, his humorous analogies, his three-pillar academic defense, and his prophetic warning about societal collapse. We've seen how he uses this clinical language to deliberately shift the discussion away from moral slurs and toward a kind of mechanical diagnosis.
And the final summarized mandate he gives to you, the listener, what he calls the final bulletproof drop and the punchline the enemy hates, is designed to be this easily digestible philosophy that you can internalize and use in your own conversations.
Here it is, summarized directly from the source material. We don't slander people, we don't rename them, we don't diminish them, we simply refuse to lie about design.
And the final memorable action items are concise and structural. They serve as the ultimate summary of his whole logical chain.
Same-sex acts are non-complementary. Love the person. Tell the truth. Stop pretending USB ports can get married.
That structural metaphor, the USB ports along with the plumbing and the pop-tart, it forces you to acknowledge that the physical world, the biological world, inherently operates on a complementary design.
The design itself testifies to the creator's intent.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to explore, and it builds directly on the source material's value of design logic.
Okay.
If the most basic aspects of the physical world, simple mechanics, engineering, anatomy, if they all possess an objective, non-negotiable design that dictates complementary function, what does this tell you about the inherent built-in resilience and intention of the creator's original blueprint? Does the physical world's insistence on structural truth suggest that the denial of complementarity must always result in fiction, regardless of how intense the social pressure to redefine that reality becomes?
That is the structural logic that Pastor John wants you to internalize and explore further.
A compelling piece of logical architecture.
It certainly is. Thank you for joining us on this Discernment Drop. Go forth and apply this knowledge with clarity and truth.